And good evening, LBE community, family, supporters, friends, colleagues. It's great to be back. It seems like we were just here a few days ago with the
Friday.
barbershop.
Friday.
And so our haircuts are still, we're still good, Brother Jermaine.
Still got the line up and still feeling
All right.
strong.
Matter of fact, I'm going to the real barbershop tomorrow.
Yeah, I need to
But
do the
thank
same.
you so much, LBE community, for joining us. As always, we are dedicated, committed on a serious mission to bring those topics of discussion to enlighten, inform, and to educate. And I really think this evening's topic could not be any more timely. Talking about Black progress, where are we with it? What does it look like to us as a people? And I was reading about a new organization, Black Progress Matters, and uh, it really does it, and the platform that they're on, it's just as critical as Black Lives Matter, but talking about the presence of Black people in corporate, in any organization, and what that means to the success of that organization and the people who are a part of that organization. So, with that being said, Brother Jermaine, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I imagine it'll be the first of a few on this topic because it's quite a lofty topic. But whenever we get the opportunity to have an in-depth discussion like this, I'm excited for it. So I'm doing great.
Well, I have to tell you, you got some awesome sisters to have this conversation with. So I trust that you are ready. I appreciate your vision and your wisdom as a young brother that's coming up um, in this segment of the struggle. And that's one of the things that I imagine we will address this evening. You know, we talk about the struggle, and I often will say the struggle is real. And perhaps some of our audience are probably still like, there's still a struggle. They're still struggling. And so I know the two sisters that we have on here, they are ready to get into this conversation. And so, with that being said, I'll see you on the other side.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. See you on the other side. Hello, good doctors, Dr. Howard, Dr. Hart. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or evening, even.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
for
us.
having us.
Mhm.
Of course, of course.
Got
Just
your
for our
lock.
viewers, yeah, just for our viewers, so they're aware who we're talking to. If it's all right with you, I'd love to just read some brief introductions of the two of you, just so folks know the level of expertise and excellence we've got on the call.
Okay.
So Dr. Ann Hart is the former Deputy Associate Superintendent for the Arizona Department. It says Arizona Department of Arizona, and I know for a fact that that is not correct.
Education.
Of education, that's exactly what I thought. Yeah, for the Arizona Department of Education, she's a visionary, inspirational speaker, a writer, strategic engagement advocate who inspires and leads by the principle of having faith for the journey. Her purpose-driven passion is to educate others regarding various school and community issues by raising educational and community awareness through her robust civic involvement and contributions. Dr. Hart, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. And Dr. Howard, Dr. Natasha R. Howard is an assistant professor of communication of arts at the Community College of Baltimore County.
Actually, I just started a new position. I'm
Ooh.
assistant professor of communication studies at Morehouse College now.
Whoa, at Morehouse. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank
Wow.
you.
In the presence of royalty here. Oh my goodness
you.
gracious.
Very
Congratulations.
new. Thank
Well,
you.
I'm so honored to be a part of that announcement here.
Thank you.
Well, I've got here that your areas of specialization include things like the representation of intersectionality of race, gender, sexuality,
Yes.
and respectability in the media, with a
Mhm.
particular focus on Black women, women's studies, and hip hop culture. You're the
Mhm.
co-editor of the book Black Women in Popular Culture. The conversation continues. And you've been published in both academic and popular outlets on topics pertaining to the representation of Black women in the media and in pop culture. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and congratulations. That is so
Thank
very
you.
exciting.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, to frame this conversation, like the wonderful Sister Lewis said, we're here to talk about progress, particularly progress for the Black community. Now, that's obviously a centuries and centuries and centuries spanning conversation with a plethora of different pillars we could get into and talk about. By all means, I want to keep this conversation organic. And so if we go down a particular hole, we'll follow it. But for the most part, what folks can expect to hear questions on tonight is really the overarching principles and thoughts around what progress really is and what that looks like. What I'm hoping folks take away from this conversation is that there's generally a misconception that in the Black community, we're a monolith, right? And so we all feel exactly the same. We vote the same way. We view policing the same way. I'm seeing head nods. Obviously, that's not the case. And so really, I'll throw the questions out there. No need for hand raising. We can keep it casual, like we're chilling at a cafe and having a good discussion. And we can share some insight with folks. I'm looking forward to learning from you two.
Okay.
Great. So we'll start really easy. What are and my first question for the two of you are, what issues facing our community, the Black community, are you particularly passionate about seeing addressed? And then what do you feel the current barriers are to addressing those issues? Super easy question to start with.
Super easy.
So I'll start, but before I do, I would like to say again, Dr. Howard, congratulations on your position.
Thank you so much.
I'm especially happy about that. My son is a graduate of Morehouse College, the class of 08.
Awesome.
And so that created a great background for what he is today as a young man. So
awesome.
I am very respectful of Morehouse.
Thank you.
I like the way you framed this question because the thing of it is that we have a lot of issues. And for me, there are many. And I will start by saying I'm very concerned about the equity in education and everything that falls under that sphere, because there are many pieces to it. We're research showing that, Blacks and white are graduating at almost the same rate, but they're not equally educated. And that's clearly just demonstrated at the economic equity, because they're not providing us the same information, the same opportunities. If it were, we would have more of a voice at the table. We're not getting those opportunities. And educational equity and equality affects how our students matriculate through adolescence to adulthood, and how they're able to grasp and be successful in their selected colleges and universities, because it affects your self-esteem. Especially when you're targeted because of the color of your skin, the way you wear your hair, where you live, and all those things affect the values that are placed on an individual who, when born, as we seek to go through the tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're not met when they're pushed into corners and subjected to racism at young ages, and they're not able to handle it. So there are a lot of parameters in that keep us off of that course of being able to have a steady opportunity for fairness and opportunities, right? And as a result of that, and I say right now, my two biggest pieces, or the other one is mental health and wellness. And because, they said over 40 million Americans in the United States, African Americans suffer from anxiety. And so when you have those issues that are coupled with the integration of jobs, economics and socialization and other pillars that helps one to become engaged, healthy in a healthy manner in the community, and you're interacting with adults who are responsible for children and educating children, or that you have other counterparts in other parts of the workforce or the other parts of essential services, professional and otherwise, that negate those opportunities to provide that healthiness that's needed for us to all feel like we're getting off on a fair footing. And unfortunately, we don't have a large percentage of African American therapists, licensed psychologists, and licensed psychiatrists who can offer that comfort to African Americans who want to seek help, because we don't share the same cultural background. And I start off with those two, with education, equity, and equality, and mental health and wellness as it relates to anxiety and other mental health issues, because to me, that is the cornerstone of where the pandemic has left us right now. And of course, there are many things, but those are the two that are paramount to me right now.
Thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate that insight. You know, my background is mental health. That's where I work now. Is in the field of mental health, and the experience of being Black and having anxiety is so specific, because it's easy to look at the statistics of depression and anxiety amongst the Black population and say it's the same neurotransmitter imbalance that everyone else experiences. But the reality is, when you're living in a society where you feel not only undervalued but actively targeted, in danger, or disenfranchised, the kind of treatment you need is so different, right? Because it's not just walking in to get coping skills, right? It's you're anxious about very real environmental stressors. And if you don't have a counselor who can understand that, it's hard to really have the conversations you need. And then if you don't have a good holistic education, it's hard to even have the introspection to understand what's going on with yourself. Right. And so you're trying to fill in these gaps of self-understanding and exploration that the system has kind of left you scrounging to get, and then the resources just aren't there. So I appreciate you expressing that concern. Dr. Howard, what about yourself? What are you particularly passionate about? What do you see as big issues facing our community?
That term equity is definitely the thing that really stands out for me. I think particularly one of the first things that going off of the health aspect, I just think about just the implicit bias that we still face just in like dealing with healthcare workers. The idea that we can tolerate more pain, or like not being listened to, or not given credibility. I'm like, so in addition to all of the health outcomes that we have to deal with that when we do decide to actually go to the doctor. And so, and it's frustrating. In particular, it's something I'm passionate about, because it's one of those things where I think a lot often actually about the high maternal mortality rate amongst Black women. So even outside of the pandemic, I just think about how, those statistics in this country, and how like the statistics for that in our country are ridiculous, honestly, not for a country that has as much technology, is supposed to be as advanced as it is. And I think of women I know who have been in that, who have, with their doctors, the different things that they've thought about, like having be like, how can I make a good impression on my doctor so that my doctor will pay attention to me more, and so that my doctor will listen to me, or like I'll stand out. And so that, in terms of the healthcare, just if you're dealing with that, just in terms of like trying to become a mother, just across the board, not being listened to. I'm thinking about cases that I've heard in the midst of COVID of people who passed away. They've tried to explain like their symptoms were a certain way. There was a particular sister from my hometown in Indianapolis who had passed away. Like, the key thing is she was a doctor herself, which is key. And she kept telling them these issues that she was having, and the doctors would not listen to her. And she unfortunately passed away. So that's a big one I think about in terms of healthcare. I also think in terms of, even aside from the bias, just having access. I think that there are too many people in our community who just do not have access to basic things that you need. Like, having access to healthcare for one, because the idea of how expensive, how much debt you can acquire if you do not have insurance. I think about access to just a safe environment, just the idea, like, having the distrust of maybe of the police, but just in general, just having communities where there's litter, the environments. That's particularly close to me because I just did a fellowship and did some nonprofit work this past summer, where I was working with an environmental group. And so just being in this particular neighborhood and their concerns about lead being in the water and whatnot. And that's still a concern for some people. There's still definitely communities in our community that are suffering from that. And so those are the pieces. But I think also just in terms of, I'm really passionate just about the idea of being able to feel safe and to be like being able to walk around and be that carefree, Black girl, Black boy. Like that just seems like it seems almost like if you are able to do that, it's an accomplishment, just because of the implicit bias that's like, people just suspect you for anything just for being in this brown skin. And so that's an area that it really sort of frustrates me. I think that's part of one of the reasons I'm really interested in storytelling, because it's like, well, maybe the more that we're humanized, people realize that we're not a threat. But I mean, I think that's sort of, I don't know, maybe I'm just daydreaming in terms of that aspect. But I think just across the board, just being able to reach a level of equity and tackling systemic racism and all the ways that affects our community, those are things that stick out to me.
That point you just raised on storytelling and humanizing as a way to, really have these good conversations and push progress. That's something I've been racking in my head a lot. So I currently chair the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council for my company, for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we're trying to roll out these initiatives. And one of the things that, not even just at work, but just in general, while trying to promote progress, is you run into folks who have lived life so far removed from that level of oppression that when you tell them these statistics about the Black maternal mortality rate in the U.S., about education outcomes, about mental health outcomes for Black folks, about lead in the water, that experience is so far removed from a lot of the population who's grown up in privilege, who's white, who's part of the majority. How do you feel then that we really express the severity of these issues to the extent that we can mobilize action? Or is that something that we're past and now it's just up to us to try to fix these problems, and whoever wants to come along can come along? And I open that question to the both of you. How do you get folks to believe you and to believe that it's an actual issue?
So you spoke about storytelling. I'll let you start first, because I think it parlays into what you said, storytelling. Then I'll meet you on the other side.
Okay, I really think that in a sense we're kind of like past like other people, like trying to convince other people. I think that like within communities, something that I really believe in is the idea of mobilizing people, like basically empowering people to have their voices amplified, like state their concerns, and organizing within the communities amongst the people who are experiencing this. So it's like you can try. That's why when I think about the storytelling, I'm like, we can try and convince people that these realities are out there, but some people just aren't going to see that veil. And so it's like, okay, we don't have time for the convincing. It's more so like being active, like mobilizing or communities and empowering them basically to, go to community meetings, let these officials know what's going on, like make whatever, take the steps basically to start trying to address and resolve these different issues, and have these stories told within it. Like that's going to be a key piece, like not it being a part of saying, no, this is happening because this happened to me. I have a story. This happened to my neighbor. I know that this is actually going on. So I'm more so of the, whoever wants to come along after the ball gets rolling type.
So, and I agree with you, Dr. Howard. And I always believe that the way anyone is convinced of anything is when it hits them in the heart.
Mm.
It's the passionate piece, the human piece, and you spoke on it as well, Dr. Howard. And the thing of it is that empowerment, they're such strong words. They're words that mean a lot, but trying to get people together, especially African Americans, to know what it means and how to do that. We use those mobilization, collaboration, and those things but when it comes time, I live in Phoenix, okay? And we have been going through some crises here with a lot of different issues, okay? Police brutality, policing, community policing, trust and initiative and accountability. And that means different things to different people. So our experiences dictate what train of thought that we get on and what form that we back and who we support, because we don't agree and believe the same thing. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make as African Americans is we look for all of us to believe and say the same, like you said earlier, Jermaine, about monolithic. We don't think alike. Our experiences are different. It constitutes different things. So therefore, there are different methods that need to be used that are going to bring about the issue, because the lead in water is huge, and also not just the infant mortality, but mortality of women dying during maternity, during pregnancy, giving birth, and it's kind of swept under the rug. We need to have that story told where someone can feel it. And it has to be delivered in a passionate way. It almost has to be in your face. And we need to go back to what worked for us, my grandparents, our ancestors, whose backs I stand on. I think we spend a lot of time on social media. We read things on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We read it. We get upset about it. We hear about it. We all know about it. But what's important is how we, execute it. And that's where I think that where we become splintered, the execution of it all. And we can't look for one another, people that look just like us, to believe and say this is the issue. And it's just clearly what's happened in America today with our racial divide. We know that Black Lives Matter, and we know that 99% of Black people believe and understand that. I hope I'm fair by saying 99%, but it won't move a needle until we get people that don't look like us to speak to that. And that's where we have to come to a happy medium. We have to join. We have to be able to open up that conversation with other ethnicities, to create a diversity that speaks volumes through its actions and execute the issues, because they don't just affect Black people. They affect anybody that's in disadvantaged areas or socially economically deprived or uneducated or jobless or unemployed, and etc. So we have to make sure that we understand how to meet those challenges and get those people that are involved. And it may mean leaving your neighborhood, leaving your job, leaving your county, and being that voice and finding those trusted persons who can deliver that message, that you have a reasonable amount of people that will follow behind that message.
Yeah, and I love that. And I also appreciate you talking about, there seems to be a generational divide in the approach to social justice. But also, I'd like to back up a little further in what you were saying about, kind of standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. When I first started getting involved in the protests and the movements, back in Ferguson, when Ferguson was the big national discussion, I remember attending protest, and it was exciting, down for the cause. You're out there in the streets, you're making your voice heard.
Right.
And time and time again, so there was this order. So you hear about you learn about the issue on social media, you hear about the protests on social media, you go to the protests, you make your voice heard. There's a lot of solidarity, and then the protest ends and people kind of go home. And if you're just an individual who's not already linked up with a movement, you're kind of left with the, now what? Now, do I just wait for the next protest? Do I organize another protest? What are the next action steps? after the protest.
Yeah.
If I could ask you folks to speak to that. So, after the protest, what does organizing actually look like and mean? How do you actually get involved? And what are usually the next steps after that folks should be seeking to help advance the movement past the chants, the signs, and getting consolidated in that modality?
Well, first, the thing that gets attention is money. Okay. Because protests, you said it exactly correct. You have people that are, that can empower and embolden themselves, and they connect the dots with those persons. But you have people that who come out, who are passionate and empathetic about what has happened, and they end up in a corner because they don't want to be in robust situations where they may end up getting arrested,
Right.
or being charged with things because they're just on the scene. And that's the situation that happened here in Phoenix. That was terrible the way this happened, because there's a certain population that wants to turn peaceful protests into things where you should be able to exercise your First Amendment rights, right? And if you want to protest or be visibly present to support something, it shouldn't have to result in somebody getting apprehended, detained, and arrested, and consequently that follows you. But when you have an organization that puts money into an organization that not only will support you, but support a cause, follow up on it, talk about it, and bring it to the proper constituents, politicians, and et cetera, et cetera. It's key. And not only that, but if something happens, then you're supported with legal advisement. And therefore, because if you're out here just on your own, marching across the freeway at a protest, and that's what the consequences are going to be, then at the end of the day, who's going to support you?
Who has your back? Right.
Who has your back? And those orgs that have that money behind them, if you look on the website, those organizations, those people are protected. And you want to look at it clearly and closely, because of course, too many times we get accused of putting our hands in the cookie jar. And then when it's time to to execute that protection, it's not there. So it has to be legitimized. Those protests has to be organized, has to be logistics involved, and it has to have money backing it, because now in this culture, if you walk across the street and jaywalk, you're liable to end up in jail. And that's the real deal, and that's what's going on right now. So we need to have an organization that supports individuals that decide to be on board with it, nationally and locally, that will support you financially.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That money piece, I think, is something that sometimes people don't want to think about, or they, because it can be tough. You could be wanting to protest and just are like, well, I don't have any money. What could I be involved in?
Who's going to protect you?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think also a piece, jumping off of what you said, Dr. Hart, is also the logistics. I think that you want to be involved with organizations that there's a plan. So after this protest, what our next step is, we're going to basically consistently blow up the phones of these officials till we are heard, to like make our concern heard. I think I actually heard once at a community meeting this summer, they're like, if the office gets 10 calls, that they consider that by that then it's an issue. Then they'll start paying attention.
Class
action. Exactly. Like, 10 people, maybe we need to do something about it. So just basically, having some kind of plan as to what's going to be happening next. Because the protesting, I think, it feels good. I admit, be out there, solidarity. But then
great.
Afterwards, it feels great. But then it's just like, okay, so.
But you know what? It's going to be a time where we're going to have to learn, take off our T-shirts and our tennis shoes, because, if you look at the legislations that are attempting to be passed in Arizona right now, you have to put pen to paper on this. When I speak about logistics, as you as well are saying, also, Dr. Howard, this stuff has to be put in policy. If it's not put in policy, it's you can be the biggest voice and have the biggest. Right.
Policy,
Right.
and that's key. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily, because they're not familiar with policy, you're not familiar like with proceedings and how things escalate. And I think that having that knowledge, like I myself, like I don't come from a policy background, but that's been something that I've been interested in learning about more so in terms of putting research towards helping write and support policy, because that ultimately that's gonna be the thing that helps to actually get some change
So
to take
therefore,
place.
what we're speaking on, the three of us, is really, therefore, we talked about generations, right? We have the baby boomers, we have the generation X, Y, and Z, and the millenniums. And if you tier those in, when you put things in logistics, you're going to put, okay, my era is not into social media, so you get that. Like, that's how Obama won his campaign. Okay. He had a professional social media firm, and there was levels. So you get your policymakers, you incorporate levels of how you want to enact the whole process, and you have to work like a fine-tuned engine. African Americans, we have to put ourselves in a position where we're respected, we're not dismissed, we're not excluded. We want to take our rage and make it right. We want to take, our discrimination and eradicate it, but we want to put it to paper where we can. That's the only thing that's going to travel. Because if we start to look at these legislation, these bills that they're pushing it through in Arizona right now and across the country, we're going to be in a bind.
Yep. In a position where we can't vote and we can't protest. That's what a lot of these policies are getting now, where you can't do either of them anymore.
It's going to be a point where we won't be able to protest at all.
Without it being considered gang activity in some of these bills, or and that's scary. And Dr. Howard, I love what you said about that policy portion, because I think that's where you lose a lot of folks. That can be so intimidating, right? If you're just you're passionate about seeing right done, but that's really not your background, that's not your skill set. For viewers who are watching this or who are going to go back and watch this, I hope you're taking notes. We're weaving a bit of a story here of garnering an organization with money to organize a movement that has a follow-up plan and then educates the public on how to engage in that follow-up portion. That's kind of the missing piece here in this question. But one of the things that I wanted to ask kind of on this point of policy is, so there, especially in the younger generations, at least I noticed, this is purely anecdotal, there's this big burnout with our current systems of power and of enacting change, right? The way voting is done, the way policies are written, the way budgets are enacted, on the city level, there's a lot of disenfranchisement and feelings of exclusion there. And so then you're hearing murmurings, or I'm hearing murmurings close to the ground, that you can't fix things or change things for the better from within a corrupt system. What are your thoughts on that approach? Is it still possible to enact change from within the system? What does that look like? Can you speak to that interplay between trying to make things better by utilizing a system that a lot of folks feel like is actively hurting us in some instances?
So, I think that in reality, when things are being implemented without real change, that's why we don't see real success. And, and by what I mean by that, theoretically, just take any given organization, whether it's an education system of a school or wherever, a police department or wherever. Most of us have jobs. We work in different entities, and when you're employed and you're working in these entities and these organizations, what are you mainly doing? You're in the pipeline of what already has existed, whatever the culture is and has been, and the culture is implemented and activated and executed by those who have mostly been in the system the longest. What happens, and that eliminates and waters down the opportunity for change, because people don't want to change their ideas in that culture. And what is failing our systems is that as we go from the 80s to the 90s to the 21st century, we still are operating under our old cultures, old mindsets, old thoughts, And the way that continues to happen is with the same people. And what couples that is discrimination, because employers like to hire their friends and their family and people that they know, which creates that same type of mindset. And it typically happens, as we know, in police departments. Okay. This is one thing that, you get to say, you're not going to hire, or in school settings, superintendents, for instance, are hired by governing boards. And right, superintendents hire principals, governing boards hire superintendents, principals hire teachers. And if you're a principal of a school or you're a CEO of an organization, are you going to hire anybody that doesn't think like you?
No.
And if they think too far to the left or too far to the right, you're not going to get the job. So in answering your question, Jermaine, it has to take a flushing, a pure flushing. You have to flush out of the system. I mean, I'm retired. I understand that my values and thoughts are a lot different. So I go in as a consultant. Let me help and show you how this is supposed to be done, because I've already been there. And Dr. Howard, you probably can relate to this too. But I just think we still have the old mindset, the old guards still in place, operating things the same way. Now, I'm gonna take it a step deeper than this. Look at the Constitution. Okay. The Constitution is extremely racist. Every sentence is on there. You have people are okay, what does the Constitution talk about? And you had 36 people of the signers who had slaves. Okay. And we need to go back and we need to rewrite the Constitution. We need to rewrite Declaration of Independence. Look at the Star Spangled Banner. We're still using 19th century conversation and dialogue. It doesn't work in the 21st century. What happens in our schools and our books, our curriculum? And then critical race theory, don't get me started on that. We have 5 states in the country that don't even want anybody to, you're not allowed to even teach what has happened with white privilege and the disenfranchisement of blacks and et cetera, et cetera. So this is why we're stuck in the mud. And when we're trying to get our little SUVs out of the mud and our ATVs, that establishment, who's setting us back? White nationalists, ones who are sitting here with their great grandfathers and their fathers' fathers have put them in the system, and all they do is roll out the same kind of ideologies. Okay, so when you get an organization, they say, oh, we have 5 black applicants, we have 20 white, we're going to hire 1 black. No, do we not want any change? Right.
And we've done them a favor by doing so, because we've increased diversity, and so check. And let's continue with business as usual.
And you can sit at the table and have a conversation with us, but we don't really want to hear what you say. Or you offer your insight and it's crickets. And then someone says the same thing who doesn't look like you, and it rolls out to be a master plan. So there are a lot of pieces to that, but the short story of that is that we have to do a flushing. We have to flush out the system and get rid of the old and bring in sincerity and passion and empathy and realistic change to our orgs that are fair and equitable.
I love that. That Constitution conversation is a breath of fresh air. Breath of fresh air. None of us on this call would even be allowed in the room where they had the pens back then, let alone.
Not at all.
Yeah. So, Dr. Howard, the same question to you. This idea that so we've got these systems, these huge systems that were built largely during times where we weren't even considered human. They couldn't even fathom the level of technology or the issues that we're facing today, the pushes for equity that have been strived for. So a lot of these systems have actively hurt us. Do you feel that change is able to be done through that system? And what does that look like to you?
I mean, really, Dr. Hart said it all. I don't feel like there's much I can really add to that. I agree. I think you have to get new blood in. You have to like revamp it. The system's like the way that it is now, it's not broken. It's fixed. It's working the way it was made to work. And so we have to basically look at rewriting it, like getting people in. I mean, it seems like it's been incrementally. You see different politicians, different places that can get pieces in, but there's so many things we need to get out of the way, like that filibuster, like that topic right there. That's just a small start, but you know what I mean? It's like that's progress. We basically have to bit by bit like revamp it, because to your point, like it's outdated. All these ideas, these ideals that everything is built on, it doesn't fit the society we have today. And it I don't think the people who wrote that, they never could have even fathomed that things will look like how they are today. So I mean, flush it out and start from scratch.
Right.
It was their privilege because it worked for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to work for us.
For
You know,
anyone else.
we can stay in this land and in our properties, in our little communities, in our little cozy codes, as long as we do what's expected. Okay, because Jim Crow is alive and kicking, you know, and we still are made to feel like we have to be invited to the table. And I like, who was it that Shirley Chisholm said, if you're not invited to the table, bring a folding chair.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Invite yourself. And if it's not new energy or new anything, old policy doesn't work with the 21st century. It has to be redeveloped, re-implemented. And not only that, it has to be experimented with. How do you know this is going to work?
Yeah, and that's the hard part, is convincing folks that, you know, there's going to be some trial and error here. I think one of the things that gets hard in addressing problems, you know, I noticed this coming from the Black community, but also just trying to propose problems or solutions in general, is if someone in power can poke a hole in your proposal, even if it's a small hole, it gets scrapped. Well, you know, that's no better than what's already going on here. Look at this one problem. We're not going to try it out then. We're just going to use what we've been doing, because you haven't proposed this perfect solution to the issue that you're trying to address, which can be so extremely frustrating, right? Because it seems like it's only the disenfranchised that are expected to come up with these genius levels of sweeping solutions. You know, and if we don't have that, we don't get to have the seat at the table.
Exactly.
You know, and that's just not a standard anyone can live up to. And then that burns a lot of people out from even wanting to participate in the system in the first place, right? It's like, I'm not smart enough to fix this. I can't solve the climate crises with one or two solutions, so why even try? You know, that can be frustrating. I want to pivot here to also go back on something else that we've touched on here and there now throughout this conversation, which is the role of social media in social justice. It's something that it's hard to even talk about nowadays, especially in COVID times, when so much of our interactions have been relegated to the virtual format. You know, I can think of plenty of pros and pleny of cons to it, but this isn't the Jermaine Barkley show. And so I want to ask the two of you, what are your views on the role that social media plays right now in promoting progress, for better or for worse?
So I will start off by saying, Dr. Howard, two things. I mean, and when I say two things, I mean the pros and the cons. First of all, I think social media is huge. I think is absolutely necessary and needed, and it's phenomenal. It really, really is. It really, truly is. It's an engine that's been effective. Communication is everything. Information is knowledge and power, right? And people that are experiencing these things in different parts of the city are sharing. And we get this information and we keep it to ourselves. And all we do is reshare it. We post it, reshare it. We send it to our friend. This is what happened over here. Just like with this, well, it's a lot of things. I'll just say that. And that's the good part. We get information. But I still say my biggest initiative that I would like to see foster more is that I wish that the social media, I don't want to call them trolls, but those that spend time in putting out information, if they would do more with it in terms of teaching and showing how to engineer the next steps. Because that's what people really want to do. They want to be engaged behind the curtain. People like to be able to add their 2 cents and not necessarily get on the platform. That's why you have those people who can speak and those people who choose not to. Or some people speak better behind closed doors, but it was time to get in front of audiences. Their whole narrative is watered down. But social media's pugnacs, whatever you want to call them, they need to give more information. This is what we need to do. This is what happened here. These are the next steps. And this is a draft of what you need to do, where you can go to your computer. The millennials are already well versed in that.
Definitely.
Type this out, print it out, and email it to where it needs to be so it can get on the desk and it can get to places that need to be where it needs to be, because as legislators, politicians, governors, and et cetera, are not getting this information, especially city council people and senators and legislators, congressmen, our Congress in DC. We got to get those bills passed, the John Lewis bill, right? George Floyd. These social media millenniums, they've got to lay out how it needs to be done. Everybody doesn't know how to engineer that next step. So that's what I say my pro and con is. Yeah, give me the information. But where does it need to go? How does a letter need to look? Right? You're in communications, Dr. Howard. Isn't that where we lose, where we miss that step with the communication piece? Everybody can voice their opinion. They can exercise it, how forcefully, and some very dramatically and passionately.
For sure. And I think I've actually seen some of that actually take place. Like I know myself, I did some letter writing this summer, and it was because of like, in terms of, there was basically platforms that were created and they're like, here's who you mail it to. Here's even a script for what you can say. I think that some of that does take place. I just think it needs to be amplified a little.
That's what I'm
needs
talking
to be
about.
amplified more. It needs to be, to your point, that like we share information, but I think what sometimes is not shared as much are solutions. Like I know for myself, if I'm like talking about this cause happened, but like, look, you can donate money here, here, and here. Like I'm going to try and find like, what are things you can actually do? But not everybody does that. Sometimes people feel like their source of activism is prayers up and that's it. Like they just,
but you know,
here's the problem.
Yeah. The other step to that should be that someone, in my opinion, has to be the engineer to that information, where if I'm saying I want, for you all to get on board and let's send our senators these letters, and whoever the engineer that can say, well, guess what? This is effective. We've gotten 1,300 letters that were sent in 1 hour. That's the kind of feedback. Feedback is important because you want to know that your contribution is making a difference.
I would agree. And I think that part for sure, like, because feedback is definitely a part of the whole communication model. Like that's something you're supposed to get back. And often people don't. They feel like, okay, well, I donated this money. I hope it helped. I've sometimes seen with the donations that can be a thing that's positive, because people were like, yeah, we've been able to bail out, like with bail funds for protesters. We've been able to use X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. If you know where it's going. But listen, let's I hate to bring this up, but when you talked about the pros and the cons, the insurrection, look what social media did.
Yeah.
On January 6th.
On the flip side.
Exactly.
I was going to say, so for me, one of the major,
and I don't mean that as a good thing. So
one of the major is the fact that people, you never know who's seeing the information that you're posting. And so like one of the things that I always am concerned about is when people, it's good to get the word out, like this is where we're organizing, this is what we're doing. But like the people who you're trying to target are not the only people who are seeing that. And so that can be a danger of it. It's like a con, but at the same time, the positive being that you can get the word out to a number of people. And just as like to your point with the insurrection, like just like you have people who are using it for, trying to protest an injustice. I mean, I guess in their eyes that was an injustice, but anyway, but they try to use it in a similar sort of fashion. And so it to every positive, I guess there has to be some sort of negative. But I definitely think the idea of people feeling as though that they can find the information, because a lot of people use social media for news. That's where they're going to look first to be like, well, what's going on or what happened, and get details. I mean, even now with what's going on in Louisiana, that seems to be the main way that people seem to be getting information out, or like trying to be able to share it, because not the kind of coverage that needs to be happening isn't happening in terms of the news. So I definitely feel like that's a positive with social media.
Yeah, it's this weird, it's like giving everyone their own nuclear bomb codes, right? And you've got factions that want to do good, that want to be great, but then like bringing up the insurrection. There's this whole cell on the internet centered around disinformation as well. And so
Right.
as
Yes.
a newbie, right, who's trying to get involved in the social justice struggle, there's so much potential to fall into these pitfalls of, I wanted to get involved. I heard this really interesting thing about children being abused, and a year later, now I'm marching for QAnon on the Capitol because I
Right.
think that the politicians are eating children,
Right.
right? You know, and I started with the nicest of intentions. I wanted
Right.
to help
Yeah.
people, you know. But then on the other flip side, from a personal note, there's a bunch of, I don't know if I would have known about most of the protests that happened on the local level here without being a part of these social media groups that had it broadcasted and said, here's the time we're meeting, here's where we're meeting at, here are the ground rules, right? You know, you even saw things like, please don't take pictures, please turn off your phones, you know, safety stuff. Here are here, you know, speaking of those bailout agencies, here are the numbers, you know.
Right.
And so it's
right.
almost the idea of having like a social media in the age of social justice literacy class or something would be so interesting. Like, how do you actually use this for good and not let it sweep you away, because it's such a, you know, such a, and it's such a stark contrast from what you learn about the civil rights movement, for instance, and how that was done. You know, I always feel, you know, kind of pivoting here from a younger generation, obviously there are deep flaws in the way that we've been taught about our history and our struggle, and a lot of missing context. Or not taught, and a bunch of missing context, and a lot of whitewashing. And so there's this mysticism around the civil rights movement that it was like Martin Luther King led the whole thing, and it was super organized, and then he kind of solved racism and he was killed, and then everything was kind of good after that. You know, bingo, bango. We get fed this really linear, inaccurate story about civil rights and that movement. And so I think it has this weird impact on, I find myself second guessing, is this really the right way to do it? It doesn't seem like how they did it in the civil rights era. They didn't have the internet. How did they get all this organization done without the internet? It seems so far removed. And then you have these historical figures, these huge pillars and leaders that you're taught about. Do you see parallels now between the fights for social justice, be it in either leadership and strong voices or just mass movements? Do you see parallels now to that era of the civil rights movement as you understand it?
I think, to me, there are very little similarities. And the reason why I say that, and anybody listening may disagree, but I'm going to tell you why I say that. Because when Blacks mobilized in the South, you know, primarily it was due to the lynchings. And prior to that, Black people were on, you know, on plantations as we were slaves brought over here against our will. We valued family and togetherness, and we always looked to someone to be our leader. Okay, you know, Sundays was the day. That's what Sunday best comes from, the day. We want to look our best, go to church, and be together, and we strive through messages and spiritual songs, and we bonded together. And we knew that the struggle was about all of us because we looked alike. We were one tribe, and we decided, hey, listen, freedom is up north. We want to migrate out of here for these particular reasons. But the stability piece was family and food. And when we met for reasons that were critical and that were important. And it led us to out of bondage in so many aspects. Today, we're in different pods. We're all over the place. You know, whoever is the most, you know, retro or the most vogue or has the biggest mouth or this, that, or the other, we tend to go where we feel comfortable with those voices instead of being one voice. We're many voices, and our voices don't always connect at the middle. It's like when you're wrapping the maypole, everybody has their own little piece, but at the end we have one, right? We have one piece. And I think a lot of it, you spoke briefly on it, Jermaine, in the beginning, we talk about the misinformation or not getting the education on. I just believe that many of our young people today, they don't know the information. And if you know what happened, read Warmth of Other Suns by Dr. Isabel Wilkerson. Read Stamped from the Beginning, and go back and learn the history of what happened. And so you can understand the importance of coming together and having one voice as a people, because if it benefits one of us, it's going to benefit all of us. That's the way we're supposed to look at it. But somewhere along this journey, as it's going to take me into imperialism and systemic discrimination
Right.
through poor housing conditions, mass incarceration, and all those kind of things, and not just migration, but immigration from those that are not even from the United States, taken away from what we were entitled to, who live here. So that created a lot of issues within our own race, and that's one of the biggest concerns I have, how we fight one another right now. We have high percentages of gangs and crime, and it's with each other. It's in our own communities. And I know Black Lives Matter, we have the huge issue with white police officers shooting our Black men in the back for wrongfully. But we have a high percentage of Black on Black crime in our communities. And that has been one of my concerns about how do we create what's hurting our Black progress. We're hurting ourselves. We are. Centuries ago, we came together. We did it through church and song. That's where we met. We met in the church house, and we got together and we believed and we hoped and we prayed. How often do we sit together and eat at the dinner table and discuss anything? Look how shattered our families have become. And the family unit is very important. If you're not sharing information with your kids, your nephews, your grandkids, and who's raising our kids? And we have kids having kids. When you have a 14-year-old having a child, they haven't learned how to be an adolescent and grow up themselves, and they're trying to become a mother. Then you want to know why at 21 years old, they're out partying with their child and not being able to provide the educational backdrop. There is a deterioration in our families, and that's huge. It even goes back to marriage. Marriage brings families. Families bring wholesome ideologies, and it brings us together. Martin Luther King talked about it, how we see, I'm dating myself, I don't mind, but every day we ate dinner together as a family. We ate breakfast and lunch and dinner on Saturdays and Sundays, and we talked. There was no TV, there was no social media, there was no phone. I can't take my daughter out for dinner or lunch without her the ride to the restaurant that she's looking at her phone the whole time, because she wants to stay in touch with what's going on, because news is information, and we like to be nosy. We like to know what's going on. But I think that we don't have a shared system of believing and trusting one another.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that perspective. It's interesting when you talk about imperialism. I always thought it's almost a purposeful tactic, right? And so you take these communities that were tribes, that were close knit, that had pretty consistent values within a community. You strip away that culture and kind of feed them this different Western ideology that emphasizes individualism, right? And individual shine and success. You kind of break them up because of that, and then you've got all these systemic pressures, like
Right.
poverty, like lack of opportunity, like redlining people into certain communities, where it only fragments you more. So now your individual values have been changed, and your environment is no longer really giving you access to that togetherness as well. And so you do feel a sense of, I'm really separated from my people. There's not as we talk about that in Flagstaff a lot. During segregation and shortly thereafter, when there was still issues with Jim Crow, there was a pretty centralized Black community up here in the South Side neighborhood, right? And a lot of the function of that community was just to help each other survive, help each other get fed.
Right.
You knew where the safe businesses were to go.
Yes.
You could take care of each other, and you were centralized. But then as gentrification moved in, and as we got more and more quote opportunity, it also dispersed us, right? And it left a lot of people stranded in certain places, a lot of people vulnerable to systemic oppression because they didn't have the community to help kind of keep them insulated from it. And so that's such a insightful, but also very
Real.
what's the word, real and at times discouraging reality of we really don't have this central. And then when you think of that civil rights movement and the leaders, a lot of those leaders got killed, right?
Yeah.
And so that part we do get taught in school, right? As a young person, I don't know much about our Black leaders, but I do know that they met violent ends. And so when you're weighing the prospect of, man, how do I get involved? How do I be that? But also I've got a family now and I've got a kid, right? And I've got people to look after. Is that something I'm really brave enough to take on? Is that is such a reality of that. I want to pivot over to you, Dr. Howard, on just your thoughts on all of that, both any similarities and where we're at with that kind of solidarity.
Going off of what you said, I think that's one of the things that I've read a lot of the different activists in Black Lives Matter, like towards the beginning, that was kind of the goal, like not having a central leader, because of the fact that when you have this one person who's out in front, they are a target. And so this idea of trying to empower, each community having their own sort of their own branch. And so basically tackling those issues in the specific community. I think that there are some people who within the current movement who have done the reading and have the background, know a little, in terms of like, okay, so we've looked at what they did then and we figured out like what some of the mistakes, we're going to try and do something different. You definitely, of course, because there's so much that we're just not taught. And then there's so much, some people just are intimidated of trying to go back and do the research. So you have people who don't, but I think that I know I've seen on social media, like not like people I know personally, but just seeing in these different places, these different leaders, these people who have that background, that knowledge, who, learned the history, done the reading, and basically have strategy, have ideas on like how we can go about trying to mobilize in our individual communities. And I feel like that is a big piece that's key, because I think a lot of times when you're taught about the civil rights movement, it's like this big movement and everybody in their city, everybody came together for the big marches, but you don't really hear about the smaller local initiatives, And I feel like that is a strength that they have, is that focusing on your local aspects. And so I feel like that's a good thing. I think there's positives to it. And I think that with that generational divide, one thing I actually admire is the fact that they don't feel like they have to be, it's this idea of being respectable, this idea of we have to be presented and have people look at us a certain way in order for people to take us seriously. Like the idea that our humanity, regardless of how we look, regardless of what you think of us, we are still human and that humanity matters. I actually admire that, because I feel like, to be honest, respectability still, to your point, got many of our leaders killed. Like they were respectable, they wore suits, and that still happened. And so I don't feel as though, I sometimes hear that as a critique, but I personally just think that, I think that's a strength. I think that's a thing in terms of the idea that it's like they are trying to buck the system, but at the same time, they're coming at it in their own way. And I think to the point that everything has to change and evolve over time, there has to be room for that to be allowed. Like I don't think we can consistently make comparisons always, like learn from our past for sure, build upon it, but I don't think that it's fair to like expect that it's going to mirror that.
Back to that that monolith idea of there's so much difference within the Black community. There's going to be different approaches as a result, and I also really like that idea of empowering smaller communities to make their own change. I see that Brother Hall has joined us. Melvin, it's great to see you, Mr. President. Great to see you join us today, which is a perfect time to bring you into this next question, which is kind of on that same point. And we've touched on it a lot, right? So both generationally, but also varying by region, varying by your political ideologies, how you were brought up, whether or not you're religious. A lot of us have pretty wildly differing views on, take an example like police brutality. What's the way forward? What's the extent of the problem? You've got factions of folks who want to see more reform, who want to see more training. You've got folks who want to see more Black police. You've got folks who want to see the abolishment of police. You've got folks who just want to see a reallocation of resources through defunding police, all within the same community. And so then the question is, how do you take what some might even consider competing interests and use that to still push the needle forward on progress without it resulting in these internal civil wars, right? How do you avoid infighting when there might be, to really frame this, there's so much hurt around some of these issues, right? You've got folks who vividly remember things like segregation and Jim Crow. You've got folks now who have had awful interactions with police, violent interactions with police. And so there's so much hurt and passion around getting this problem solved. When they result in then these very different views, how do you still ensure that it's not going to result in we spent all our resources fighting each other and we've still pushed the needle forward instead? And I open that question, President Hall, we're kind of keeping it casual, so I open that to anyone who wants to jump into that very easy, simple to answer question.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be a part of these healthy conversations. I think everything begins at this point on the grassroots level, having a conversation and identifying areas of opportunity and areas of commonality, of interest. And then, starting there, my grassroots answer is stop falling for the okie doke. So many of our people fall for the okie doke. They hear what those and all right, I'm about to get kicked out the room, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it. So to me, insanity is doing the same things over and over again, knowing the results you're going to get and expecting something different.
Right.
And for about 200 years, we've been playing this Democratic Republican game. Neither party was created with our interests. Neither party cares about us until election time rolls around. And neither party has done anything to benefit people of color as a whole. You can look at it, they might give it lip service, but however, the underlying remedies never are beneficial to us. They're just another way to enslave or create additional problems. And I'll just use as my example, when the federal government developed the WIC and welfare programs. In order for women to receive those, the men had to be removed out the house. So if you can take away the basic family structure, but yet I'm gonna give you some milk and cheese and eggs. Oh yeah, I'm gonna feed you now and I'm gonna starve you out the rest of your lives. So we've got to start looking at what we're being told is for our good and really see if it is. And if it isn't, just being human enough to say, hey, this is wrong and let's make a change. However, to keep on perpetuating the lies, hoping for a different outcome, saying if we get this brother in office, I believe one of the most critical statements ever made by a president, and I might be wrong on the president, but it was around the civil rights movement, and I believe it was FDR. He looked at Martin Luther King and he said, yeah, I know Negroes need rights. Yeah, I know they need jobs. Yeah, know they need food. You go out and make me do that. And that's the same thing. If you look at over the course of us, we've asked for jobs, education, police reform for the last 40, 50, 60 years, and we're getting the same thing. So for me personally, stop falling for the okie doke, start developing grassroots initiatives. And if you can make the change on the local level, you can impact a national level.
I don't see any difference between lynchings in the South in the 30s, the 40s, and 50s, and black men being murdered in the back in the 21st century. So our leaders are still getting killed one way or the other. and they're using disenfranchised members of populations to murder our men. And now that it doesn't even matter if you're in a car, if you're walking or bird watching, you can be in your house. Okay. So
You'll be
that
asleep.
exactly. Exactly. So it hasn't changed. It just looks different. And you're right. And that's what I was speaking on when I talked about imperialism. When you splinter the family and you do everything you can to break down the strength of what it takes to keep us strong and sufficient and efficient, because the more power you have within one another, and especially within the family union of our kids, that's where what do our kids have to look forward to when the family is broken down? And you disenfranchise the whole household so that a woman can be able to feed her family. Well, why not feed the family with a man in the house? So it's no different to me in my mind. And I just hope, and I need to build up confidence that things will change, and I don't know that they will.
Yeah. And so going to you, Dr. Howard, because I do want to make sure you have a chance to touch on this question, because I think we're about to, there's a direction I want to take this. But before we go that direction, Dr. Howard, over to you.
I got to be honest in terms of with the format. The question. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, well, the original question, and that's why I'm like, I think we're about to go a different direction.
Yeah, so I kind of lost
the question at first is, you've got within the community these really stark competing interests on what we think progress looks like. You know, you've got kind of the old guard. You know, we're going to vote for the new guy, vote for this party. You've got the folks who want to tear it down, build it back up again. You got the folks who want to just see reforms. You know, you've got a huge spectrum within this community, but we're all trying to make life better for our people. How do you marry those different things, those different, sometimes competing views of progress, without it resulting in such vitriol within our communities, right?
I want to say compromise. I want to say try to have everybody listen to each other. But I have to be honest, I honestly am not sure. I feel like that's a question that I think about a lot, because I see that a lot. You see all these different just across the board, particularly like we talk about policing. Yes, we should defund the police. No, we need to completely get rid of it. No, like all these different, we should reform the police, like all these different opinions on it. And you cannot get these different viewpoints, people to come together with one specific solution, regardless of the fact that we're all seeing the same things that are happening outside in our communities. And so, I think everything at the end of the day is a matter of interpretation. People can look at the same thing, but interpret it and perceive it different ways. And so I'm honestly not sure. I wish I had an answer, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, really easy to answer question. Exactly. And that's what's so interesting to me is going back to that idea of I don't know that any population, certainly not the majority, right? The white Anglo-Saxon population in the country, I don't think they're generally ever asked to do something like that, right? To marry all of their opposing views, it's for one, united front for progress, but they're also not in that same exact boat of oppression, right? And so they don't really need to do that, right? Whereas we're still trying to undo hundreds and hundreds of years of injustice that were actively done to us, right? Injustice actively done to us because of the color of our skin and our ancestry. And so that binds us together. Okay, we're all in the same boat. It happened to all of our ancestors. So now we're all experiencing the same systemic oppression. But my view is way different than yours. How do we both try to work towards our ideas of progress without eventually having to fight each other? Because then that just creates, we talked briefly about violence within our communities and the different things that contribute to that. The thing that I would hate to see is that same kind of infighting and vitriol cross over to progress within our communities as well, where you've got these factions actively fighting for resources, from the people in power, and we're fighting ourselves so much to get these resources that now we've lost sight on actually getting anything done, because I feel like if you win, even though we're fighting for the same people, the right thing is not going to be done, and that's, I'm completely okay with no one having an answer to that question, because more so that the reason I'd like to ask that question is for people who are watching. It's important that you understand that this is extremely complex, deep-rooted issues, full of a lot of trauma and a lot of hurt and a lot of nuance that we're trying to address, oftentimes with little resources to do it. And so it's natural to see these different perspectives come about that are sometimes real contrary to one another. Melvin, go ahead.
Brother Barkley, I while I respect that, I think that thinking is part of the problem while we're here. How do you eat an elephant?
Piece by piece.
Exactly. So as a community, we have to take a piece, take one action, one initiative, one thing that we're common on, and start from there. And then from there, things can go. However, if you're expecting, there's no race of people on the planet that agrees about everything within their own cultures. So to have the expectation that we can't move forward until we come to this mass consensus on things is just going to further impede us.
Right.
So
unrealistic. Yeah.
Take one bite at a time.
Right. And sometimes, we had a barbershop a few months ago where someone gave an example of how you strategize attacking a battlefield, and you've got some people approach from the rear, some people approach from the front, you've got air support. And I always really liked that example because it seems like that's the approach we're taking. We're all kind of taking different approaches to the same problem. I don't want to keep you folks all night. I know it's already an hour and 15. I got a couple more questions. I'm learning a lot. Don't want to call it a night quite yet. So obviously this has been an ongoing struggle, like Melvin just said, for a long time, right? And there's still a real long way to go. Are we working towards, in your mind, a set finish line here? Is there a point that you can envision, even if it's pie in the sky right now, where you would feel comfortable saying, boom, we made it, equity achieved, right? 400 years of hurt undone. Is that something we're working towards, or is this kind of an forever war, so to speak, to be relevant? Is this something we'll always be working towards? If it is something that there's an endpoint in your mind, what does that look like?
Peace.
We're at okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Hart.
So that question to me is like getting a baked potato with the whipped cream. I mean the sour cream, the chives, and the butter in it. That's a load. It's loaded. Listen, for me, I just see that we have skidded right off the train track, running into a ditch, and it was exasperated with 45. We're spending 4 years to 45. Okay. Obama has a book behind me called A Promised Land. I don't know if we will ever see that because we have too many ditches out there and now things are being inflamed. For me, number one, when Black men and women and children stop being shot in the back, and not just being Black cops, cops being police being arrested for it, but they're not being prosecuted. We only had one police officer in the last 2,000 shootings in the last 25 years where George Floyd's police got prosecuted.
Convicted,
right?
Yeah.
Convicted, prosecuted, convicted. That's, to me, when I see progress. We need prosecutors who are going to prosecute. And we need convictions. And we still don't have either for Breonna Taylor. And what happened to Tamir Rice was awful. A 12-year-old toy gun. And so that's first and number one to me, because I see 2 Black men on the screen today, and your lives are in jeopardy. Not that mine and Dr. Howard's aren't, but it's a Black man. I hope that's what you see in yourself. It's dangerous. And I worry about that every day. That's unhealthy. That's criminal. That's a tragedy. When you can't get in your car and worry about coming back home.
Mm-hmm.
And so progress in that vein could almost be summed up as being able to go through life without having to look over your shoulder and hope nobody's trying to hurt you, whether that be shoot you, take something away from you, omit you from an opportunity. You know, the idea of getting to a point where I can just move through life and not constantly be extremely cognizant that I'm a Black person and there are people out there who seek to do me active harm, and they can do it and get away with it, right?
Yeah.
You know,
feeling free
Mm-hmm.
to exist. I think that definitely that would be my idea of what it looks like to make progress. Like, okay, I can go out here and be in the world and not just worry about for myself, but not have to worry about like my brothers or, you know, my nephews, or heck, even my niece, worry about any of that we can just exist and be safe. I think that definitely is a first step of the idea of progress. Do I think we can get to it? I got to be honest, the older I get, the less the less optimistic I am. I don't know. I think that if it can be reached, I don't necessarily see it in my lifetime. I would like to hope though that I don't want to be pessimistic and say that it'll never happen, but I think that there's so much we've regressed. So any little bit of progress we made, I feel like has been rolled back. Like Dr. Hart said, it just got exacerbated in the last 4 years. I mean, if you could even say that we had made a lot of progress, so people would debate that there's been progress made, period. But for sure, I think just being safe to be like you said, the way you described it, that would be my idea of it.
Yeah, you know, we reached this precipice right now where it does seem like in the last 4 years and this year too. You know, one of the things I remember saying so vividly around the election is, man, I hope that if Joe Biden wins, people don't take their foot off the gas, you know, because they're like, the bad guy's out and now everything is bingo bango. But like, we've seen more anti-voting legislation, anti-protest legislation in these last 4 months than I think we saw in the last 4 years. And so it does feel, I just want to acknowledge that, you know, it does feel like we're at this point where it's like, man, we're really losing a lot of ground. And to Melvin's point, the folks who are in there who promised, yeah, we're here to fight for y'all, we're here to make sure this doesn't happen, you know, that doesn't seem to be, that's obviously not working because it's still happening. You know, no matter how much they get out there and say, we have to do this thing, the filibuster's still there, these things are still being passed regardless of whether or not they've got a majority or not, you know. And so it does, I just like to acknowledge that we are in this time. And if you're feeling that way and you're watching this where it's like, man, we're losing a lot of ground, you're not crazy for thinking that. I just like to acknowledge that. That's a fair thing to go. Melvin, I'll come over to you.
To answer the question, in my lifetime, do I think we'll see change? Just looking at the demographics, yes. The country is slipping away from Caucasian. You know, the numbers are there for the first time in 10 years. You know, there was no increase and actually a decrease in the birth rate, and that's trending for non-whites. The birth rates on people of color and those that identify as biracial. So when you just look at those components, some point, yeah, they're going to die out. In my lifetime, I think that we're going to have issues that transcends our color. When you're looking at just the great reset of the economy, when you look at the shutting down of the global supply chains, when you look at the restriction of movement and travel of people, goods, and things. So while I am concerned about the plight of my people, I also look at how our plight and what they disguise as our plight plays out on a much larger human scale. So I do think things are changing just because on a global scale, they're changing. So what happens globally will affect us all.
Oh, Melvin, don't get me started on the power of the proletariat. I can't even go down that road because we don't have much time left about solidarity amongst the proletariat. But I do like I do like that answer, and all of your answers I can empathize with, and appreciate you sharing that. So we're nearing the end of when we were scheduled here. I like to end on. I don't want to say it's hard to say, oh, I want to end on a positive note, because what we're discussing largely is, the example I like to give is right now there's somebody with their boot on our neck, and they're telling us to figure out how to get their boot off our neck, right? Without wanting to lift the boot off our neck. There's nothing positive really in that experience. You see a lot of human resiliency, right? You get these stories of inspiration here and there, sure. But at the end of the day, it's called a struggle because it's a struggle, right? It's we're not exercising here. It's a actual struggle for existence. But that being said, I do want to ask you folks, are there examples in history of movements, of revolutions, of pushes for equity and progress that you do look to as models or inspirational or nuggets that provide some semblance of hope to you, even if it's a small scale, even if it's not a complete and total overhaul? Are there instances or stories, to go back to the storytelling, about progress and change that you look to as a driver to keep going forward?
So I will say, while Dr. Howard is thinking really quickly, I like the avenue that women are taking in politics, because women are movers and shakers across the country, and our women are stepping up to plate. They're running for office, and they're winning, and their voice is being heard. I mean, we have the AOC, we have those 3 dynamic freshmen that came in last semester, and these women are rocking. We have our commentators, our anchors. We have our women that are being represented in every field, and they're speaking up on behalf of things that they're not afraid to speak up about. So I think that's a fresh avenue, and I think it's encouraging, and I think it's invitational and inviting to get more women to politics. I mean, first of all, let's be real. We have who as our vice president? A woman, and a Black woman. And she succeeded against the odds in getting there. That is groundbreaking history. First, it started with Barack Obama, but women are making inroads and being very successful in the avenue of politics, which is important to me, and it's important to our nation, and it's important for our young people, especially young girls, to be able to say, hey, I can do more than slide down a pole or hang out in a video or etc. Because these are things that are promising, that are going to make multitudes can benefit from it in a beneficial manner. We have to stop exposing our young kids, males as well, to professions that are not giving us a progressive opportunity, where I don't have to say, when you ask me that question, do I have hope for the future? And since you presented it with the boot on the neck, yes, when they get our knee off our necks, and it's not just in police brutality, it's in various aspects of life, the Karens of the world. Okay. I'm sure each one of you that are on this tonight with Mr. Barkley, we all have experienced once a week a Karen.
Somebody called police on me 2 weeks ago for walking
Hello.
a dog. Yeah.
Wow.
I experienced one today, and I minimized her by shutting her down, and then I made her look, indifferent to whatever it is that she was assuming that we were doing, parked in front of my son's condo talking. And I guess she didn't know the car or whatever, but no one person makes himself a judge and jury, and no one needs to be judged by someone who doesn't know the facts. So I like the move that women are making in politics.
Love it.
I'm gonna go with the first thought that I had, and I had to really think about it, was like I've always been inspired by the movements of the Black Panther Party. And it's primarily because of the idea they like how grassroots it was, like basically organizing different cities, taking care, like creating initiatives like the free breakfast program, all these different things that they put into place. Because I'm motivated by that, because I connect that to some of the grassroots that I see today in different places. Like, in particular, like I think about my hometown, how you have groups that come together that are like, they're basically, you know, trying to mobilize the youth and like putting them to work for like environmental, like helping to like get the community together environmentally. And then, you know, with that, you know, teaching them, you know, about gardening and planting and things such as that. So, and then even aside from that, I think about, you know, of course, like the Black Lives Matter groups in different cities. And like, I've seen like, again, going back to my hometown in Indiana, just like seeing Indianapolis, seeing them, you know, mobilize, not just in terms of protesting, but they would have basically like gathering money for funds for people in the community who needed it, for people who are hungry, different aspects of that. I really believe in this idea, like we all we got. And so that really is something that just, that's the thing that ultimately stands out for me.
I love that. Yep. Mutual aid and seeing grassroots. Melvin, what about you? What are some examples you look to that are positive progress?
I don't know how positive the example be, but when I think of people overcoming odds and a revolution and staking their claim, I think of the Haitian Revolution of 1789, when, you know, it was like 100,000 slaves rose up and chased the French colonizers off their island, off, you know, out of their lives. So that to me is an example. Now, on the flip side of it, that shows to you when you piss Big Brother off, what he does to you, because he's treated them like the lonely stepchild ever since. No resources, no support, no investment of infrastructure or anything else. So, however, Haiti is a true example of, if you stand up, what you can get, but also what they'll do to you when you do stand up.
Yeah. I was going to say that same example. You know, the Haitian Revolution, something I hope we cover in this group one day. It was so powerful that a lot of places in the United States stopped allowing slaves from Haiti because they didn't want that revolution to spread over to the U.S., which is just like, I mean, when you think of an example, you know, wow, right? That's overcoming odds. Folks, it is 7:32 and I'm all about time.
Oh, wow.
Time is the most precious resource that we have, so I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I do want to say, for folks who are watching, you've heard a lot of different perspectives tonight. We covered an obscene amount of ground in the last hour and a half, and so I want to applaud our participants, but I also want to leave folks on this note that, you know, when you see a Dr. Howard, a Dr. Hart, a President Hall, one day it's someone like myself, maybe. I hope that it also serves as a reminder that you're not alone in this struggle. There are people who are thinking about these things, who are talking about these things, who are working on these things. And there are things happening, you know, for the better. To Dr. Howard's point, there are grassroots efforts happening. And if you're looking to get involved, I implore you to find those opportunities to the best of your ability, because it can be really easy to feel like you're at that part of a movie where the enemy is taking over and the bad guy's about to win. And that's a very real reality and real stakes and a real possibility. We have a responsibility as resilient Black folk to make sure that that doesn't happen. And when we can come together and have these conversations, it just opens more opportunities and more doors to make sure that that doesn't happen. Like in the Haitian Revolution, there's a lot of us and a lot of excellence and a lot of power between our people. And so if you're looking for opportunities, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you're in the Flagstaff area, please don't hesitate to find me. And if you're in another community, try to find a grassroots one. And if there isn't one, try to start one. Because there's potential here. But with that, I invite Sister Lewis back to join us. I saw you pop on briefly. And man, I always learn so much from these conversations. I can't express how much I appreciate hearing your perspectives. It feeds me. It feeds me. Thank you so much. Helping me get fed.
Did you see this? Did we hear Barkley for president in 2024?
Nah, I can't get anything done as president. Maybe city council. We'll do something a little bit more local.
I hear you. I hear you. I was just putting it out there. We support everyone in the LBE community, and especially if it is going to help all of us. I have learned a lot, and it was great to be able to listen to. I think some of the most forward-thinking individuals in our tribe today, in this day and time. And so I think we all have been extremely enlightened and educated this evening. And we indeed need a part two so that Brother Jermaine can. Did you get through your list? Or did
Nope.
you still?
Not
Yeah.
even close.
All right. So we definitely
That's a good
need
thing,
to
though. That's a good thing. Yeah.
That's a good thing. We definitely need to come back with a part two because, as I said earlier, Black progress matters. And as we bring this broadcast to a close, when we are faced with the question of are we or have we really made progress, I would ask each of us to think that as long as we can think about progress, what it looks like, strategize, become involved, create the opportunities to be involved, to not be afraid to get involved. If we can say that we ourselves have made progress, have created progress, then we are indeed making progress. As long as when we self-reflect and we can go back and say, well, we have not been sitting on our hands, we have not been on the sidelines. And when I say we, those of us that are on the screen, the many other guests that we have had on this live stream, then we are indeed making progress. And yes, there will be days that will cause us to question, to call into doubt. But I would encourage each of us to not always believe what the eyes see, for sometimes they can deceive us. And so I thank each and every one of you on this screen for being the strategizers, the ones who are being very thoughtful about what progress looks like for us, what it has been for us, and most of all, what it will be for us. We can indeed be the change that we so desperately need. And it is a pleasure to know that you all are the change makers. And so with that being said, we thank you, LBE community, for joining us. We will be back very soon, week after next, with a conversation on the compromise of color, talking about racism and its place, yes, its place in the Christian church, and namely the European American Christian church. Yes, Brother Hall, we're bringing that, so we're very excited. Until we meet again, go in grace.